Alright guys, yet another Eidolon video this week. Maybe we should just make it Eidolon Mondays at this point. But I thought today I would go through the 3 things that I get asked the most about after my Eidolon videos go up, which is lures, Vomvalysts, and one-shotting limbs. Mainly on that last one, it's just about getting the amp timing and the weapon swap right. So I'm going to go over all 3 of those in this video just to clarify some things and hopefully help some people out who have asked me in the comments how these things work. So on to our first item, lures. You will need 8 fully charged lures in order to capture the Hydralist at the end of your Eidolon hunt. Now, I tend to gather up all 8 of these lures during the Terrorist phase of the hunt. I appreciate quite a few people might only gather up maybe 5 or 6 during this time and then get the remaining 2 or 3 a bit later on, but I just find it nice to have all of them together with me at the very start. So the most common question I get asked is how do you insta-hack a lure during an Arcwing blink? This is actually fairly straightforward. All you need to do is ensure the lure's HP is 0, then use your Arcwing's blink toward the lure, hit your interact key, which is usually X if you're on PC, and then hit whatever key you have bound to your ciphers. By default, it should be bound to Y on the keyboard if you're on console. Again, I'm not sure what it is, so take a look in your settings. You need to hit these keys in rapid succession to achieve the desired effect, and it can take a bit of practice, so just keep at it until you're there. Do be a bit wary, as ciphers can be fairly pricey in the early to mid game, so be mindful not to use loads of these. So outside of the insta-hack, probably the biggest difficulty players seem to have, at least in my comment section, is keeping lures alive and lure management in general. Most people seem to be losing all of their lures during the Hydralist phase of the hunt, so I just want to kind of clarify what I always reply to these people in the comments section, and that is that if you are running on solo, especially if you're running on solo as a Vault and not as a sort of support frame like Trinity or something, then it is going to be very difficult to keep your frames alive if you are not doing it at a fast pace. The longer you take killing the Hydralist, or capturing the Hydralist I should say, the more likely it is that your lures are going to be destroyed. Since Vault has no way to kind of reinforce them or heal them, you simply just need to do the fight faster and they will survive. If you're at the point where you can do a Hydralist hunt in 7 minutes 20 on the last limb, so that being you insta-shoot the last limb of the Hydralist out at 7 minutes 20, then your lures should not have sustained enough damage to die. That's basically the sum total of it, because in that time frame, all of the Eidolons combined won't have been able to put out enough damage to take them out. It's really quite that simple. So yeah, for those of you who are struggling with lure management on solo, it is going to be a case of just practicing, repeating your runs and getting faster, and that way less damage will be put onto your lures and you will see that you can breeze through the fight, keeping all of them alive and not having to worry about them. And that brings us nicely onto Vomvalysts, which do somewhat tie in with lures since we need Vomvalysts to charge the lures. Now, at the start of every hunt, you need to get a lure charged pretty quickly because you want to get over to the Terrorist and prevent him from teleporting away after you've taken out his first limb. In order to do this, we do what is called a fast charge. I do this over at East Camp, and I do have videos on my channel on how this is achieved, so I am not going to go into it. I will simply leave a link down in the description below on how you can do the fast charge. But what I will discuss a bit more is when and where Vomvalysts will spawn during your runs and how many you kind of want to be picking up at a time. So, to begin with, on the Terrorist, you will notice that underneath the Eidolon, or underneath the Terrorist, at the end of the fight, quite a few Vomvalysts will spawn, actually underneath him. So it is a good idea to park up your lures where the Terrorist is going to fall down. At the point that the Terrorist falls down, you should have 3 lures with you. You don't want any more than that, otherwise it's going to get a bit chaotic. I usually park my first lure, the one that I fast charge to begin with, just a bit back from the Terrorist so that I can pick it up once I've gathered the rest of my lures, and I'll park the other 2 lures right where he is going to fall down. That way, the Vomvalysts that spawn underneath him will spawn right next to the lures. Which brings me on to another question I get asked, which is, what is the on-call crewmate used for? The on-call crewmate is running a beam weapon, which can arc off of units. So when the on-call crewmate sees the Terrorist, the biggest and closest unit available to it, it will shoot its beam weapon at the Terrorist, which then arcs to the Vomvalysts which spawn underneath it. These will then pop, and they will charge the lures that I have parked right underneath it. Now, you should be able to charge at least one of the lures when the terrorist falls down, or at least the on-call crewmate should be able to. And after that point, you will need 2 more Vomvalysts popped before the 3rd lure charges that you have parked underneath it. These remaining Vomvalysts will spawn when the Eidolon starts to get back up again. Now at this point you should have gone around and gathered the remainder of your lures, as you'll have seen me do here. So you want to keep quite a bit back so that you don't accidentally charge any of the lures that you've just gathered instead of the one that you need charged underneath the terrorist. You need that 3rd lure charged before you get to Gantalist, otherwise you're going to have to go hunting around for some more Vomvalysts in order to charge a lure that's going to tether the Gantalist in place and stop him teleporting away when you destroy his 1st limb. Once you see that that 3rd lure underneath the Eidolon has become charged, you can go ahead and pick up all 3 of your now charged lures and just maybe drag the remainder of the lures that you've picked up underneath the Eidolon just to scoop up any extra Vomvalysts that may have spawned. Usually you can gather up about 3 additional Vomvalysts at this point, and then just fly straight over to the shrine, bring the lures with you. I will usually set up some pre-shields, maybe at the bank on short spawn, as well as mid spawn and left spawn. If I'm running the Rubico, I will probably not bother with a pre-shield at long spawn, because without the Zenith you're not going to be able to get anywhere with it anyway. If you do have the Zenith, then by all means you can pre-shield long spawn as well, and then you can get ready for the Gantalist fight. Now, similarly to the Terrorist, you are going to see quite a few Vomvalysts spawn when the Gantalist goes down, and then again when he gets back up. However, in order to get enough lures charged so that we have at least 1 ready for the Hydralist so that it doesn't teleport away, we're going to want to gather up at least 1 extra set of Vomvalysts whilst the Gantalist is down on the floor. Now, in order to do this, you want to go ahead and get into your Archwing, fly straight up, and depending on what spawn the Gantalist has sort of appeared at, you are going to want to look in some very specific places. So I've just come in to demonstrate where these Vomvalysts spawn, and we've got ourselves a Terrorist spawning already, but I'm going to crack on regardless. So for short spawn, you want to be looking around here where this camp is. The bones over here, you can also see that there's some that have spawned down by the coast over in this direction. For close left spawn, I tend to fly straight up and look literally from the top of this hillside, where you just saw those Vomvalysts spawn there, all the way down to the lakeside over here where these rocks are. You can get Vomvalysts spawning up around here, so just kind of like pan around here to see where your Vomvalyst groups are. For mid spawn, it is basically much the same as short spawn, especially over in this direction by these ruins. But for over here, you're probably a bit too close to spawn them around sort of this camp. You may want to look a bit further back to the right over by this pond, or further back down here, just up this hillside. In fact, yeah, you can see we've just got a couple that have spawned in over there. For long spawn, I usually come straight up, and you will spot some probably coming along the coastline right here. Alternatively, they will again spawn up this hillside, so just kind of pan around and look up. Really, long spawn is one that I tend not to have to find extra Vomvalysts for. They will spawn in their droves and just come at you whilst you are fighting on long spawn. There's a lot of spots they can spawn, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue for you. If, for whatever reason, you have somehow not managed to gather up enough Vomvalysts at some point during the fight, just relax and take a breather, and then go up into your Archwing and slowly move in on the locations that I've just discussed. You will eventually see some Vomvalysts spawn, at which point you can blink in, kill them, and charge the lure. And that brings us on to our final matter, which is one-shotting the Eidolon's limbs, or Synovia as they're technically called. Now for this you need 2 things. You need a good amp and you need a good weapon. Your good weapon has to be able to one-shot the Eidolon's limbs, and your good amp has to one-shot the Eidolon's shield. Now, my amp, I believe, and this is really, really old now, going back a fair few years, is still the amp that provides the single biggest instance of damage in a single blast, and that is the 177 amp. And that is made up of a Prober Scaffold and Certus Brace, that's the 7.7, which you can get from Little Duck on Fortuna. And then to finish it off, we've got a Replac Prism, which you can actually get very early on from Quill Onco on Cetus. And this is what sort of makes up that classic combo you often see me doing in my runs of the 2 Proper shots and 1 Replac Prism shot, which we'll come on to soon. Now, to kind of top this off, we are running 2 arcanes on this build, which you can get from the Zariman. And this is Eternal Onslaught, which provides us with additional crit chance, and Eternal Eradicate, which provides us with additional damage. Now, both of these combined will guarantee us a one-shot on the shield for the Terrorist and the Gantalist with our proper Replac combo. It will not guarantee us a one-shot on the Hydralist shield without a damage blessing from an MR30 player or higher at a relay. So that is something to note. If you're not MR30, you don't have a damage blessing, do not expect to be constantly one-shotting the Hydralist limbs, or Hydralist shield, sorry, because, yeah, it won't allow for that unless you have that damage blessing, which is a bit of a shame, but it is what it is. Maybe in the future the devs will release something which will allow us to do that. You will occasionally one-shot the Hydralist shield because Eternal Onslaught provides enough critical chance for the Replac to actually do a 200% crit, so it will be an enhanced crit, an orange crit, if you will. And that is what will provide that additional little bit of damage to tip the shield takedown over the edge for the Hydralist every now and then, but it's not guaranteed. So this is the amp that you really want to be using for this, and so now what we'll do is we'll just quickly move on to what weapon you want to be using. Alright, so newsflash, it really doesn't matter what weapon you want to run for your Eidolon hunts. If it one-shots the Hydralist limb and you are comfortable using that weapon, then please do continue to use it and don't listen to what anyone else tells you to run, including myself. I like to run the Zenith because it allows me to gain an additional 5 to 8 seconds on a long spawn, so when the Gantalist or the Hydralist spawns on long spawn, it just means that I can pop their first limb straight through the floor after the shield's down, rather than having to wait for it to emerge. I like to get on with my runs, but I appreciate, you know, some people can't be bothered to faff about with all of that nonsense. Generally speaking, when it comes to the weapon you're using, in order to one-shot the limb, you want to get a decent amount of damage on the weapon itself through crit chance and crit damage, as well as multi-shot. But to be honest, a lot of the damage on your weapon is going to be transferred from your frame. Now, Volt is one of the best weapons platform frames in the game, and he also enhances operator amp damage, which is why a lot of Eidolon hunters will use him. And to add to my weapon's damage, you can throw on Tau Forged Violet Shards now, which are going to give me so much electric damage, which is in fact combining with Hellfire here to create radiation. You know, I don't actually need that to have radiation, but because I want to have cold damage on as well, I will include those mods as you just saw before. So Stormbringer to create the radiation, and then Prime Cryo rounds for the additional cold, because Eidolons do take increased damage to cold as much as they do to radiation now, in fact. So yeah, that's always fun. But you know, you can use Rubico, you can use whatever sort of semi-automatic rifle does the job for you. Watch my video last week if you want to see a build that doesn't use a Riven mod. My Riven mod's pretty hefty. I've basically invested quite a lot into the Zenith just so that it can work for me. But like I said, you can use any weapon you want as long as it can one-shot the limb. So now we come on to the crux of the matter, which is timing. Now, I do actually have a video on this, which is still relevant, even though it's from a while back. So please go ahead and have a look at that. I'll link it down in the description below. But I'll quickly kind of breeze over it here, and you've obviously seen me do it in my runs. So hopefully there won't be sort of too much to this. But essentially, in our operator, the key to getting back into your frame very quickly is not to just use transference to come back in. As you can see, there's a bit of a delay. But instead use your melee weapon to come back into your frame. Now, the issue that arises from this is that obviously we end up firing our melee weapon rather than firing our primary weapon. So there can sometimes be, again, a bit of a delay before we can fire our Zenith after we fire our melee weapon. And that is what people ask me a lot in the comments. Now, I get around this by actually making sure that I have my melee weapon out before I do my frame swap. So rather than having my Zenith in my hand, like so, I'll just make sure that I have my melee weapon in my hand before going into operator. Now, for whatever reason, I'm sure there is a reason in terms of it calculating, you know, on a frame-by-frame basis what weapon should be out on your frame. I tend to find that this allows you to fire your Zenith very quickly before it actually does the animation of your melee weapon. So I'll just kind of try and demonstrate that here. So you heard there, when I came into my frame, I actually fired my Zenith and then my melee weapon and then my Zenith again. And that's what you're going for to get that instant takedown. And yeah, that's really all I can say about it. I would recommend going to have a look at that video I've linked down in the description, because it does go into slow motion on exactly what's going on. You know, a lot of people have this problem where they'll sort of do and then fire. So there's no Zenith shot there before my melee weapon, so you've got that little bit of a delay before the shot goes off. And I do find that just having my melee weapon out before going into my operator or your drifter does help with that a lot. So yeah, hopefully that was useful. I will quickly just demonstrate this in a quick run, and then we'll round this video out.
That device is insufficient. You are directed to secure and employ additional Eidolon rules.
Alright, so hopefully you found this useful, guys. I am probably going to be referring back to this video on anyone who asks these questions again in the comments, because yeah, I do spend a lot of time actually answering them. So yeah, if you have any more questions, sort of, from what I've explained and demonstrated in this video, then please do leave those down in the comments below, and I'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, guys, if you did enjoy the video and found it interesting, please leave a like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one.